Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and in this video we're going to take a look at the recipe and techniques I'm going to use for painting all the bone in my upcoming Soulblight Gravelords army project. Now I'm going to use the little gibbet guy on the left to do the demo on, because there's not that much bone on the skeleton we've been using for the other videos in the corrosion series. There's lots of different recipes we can use for bone, from a sort of bright, almost white desiccated bone, and I want to go complete other end of the scale with this guy and do a really dingy, swampy, old, almost green bone. So that's what we'll take a look at in this video. Let's get to it. The three main colours we're going to use are Vallejo Model Colour US Olive Drab, Games Workshop Karak Stone, and lastly Vallejo Model Colour Deck Tan. These are often my go-to for regardless the bone I'm going to paint. They're a really nice starting point. I would recommend that you use a wet palette for this. I do with all of my painting, but it will be particularly useful with this one because we're going to be using quite dilute mixes of paints. We're going to be using like 50-50 mixes, nothing too complicated. It's going to be nice to be able to constantly come back and use them throughout the paint job. To dilute it, I'm just using water, so I've got sort of 2 brushfuls of water there, just thinning out the paint. And with that mix, so just the US Olive Drab, we're going to base coat the whole skeleton. To get a nice smooth base coat for us to work from, I'm going to apply between 2 and 3 coats. I'm just using a large brush to get it on the model. When we're using very dilute mixes, beware that you don't have too much on your brush. So a nice habit to get into is just touching the brush off on a little piece of cloth or something, or back of your hand or whatever like that, just to make sure you don't flood the miniature with whatever paint you've got on your brush. As it's our base coat mix, we're going to be using a slightly thicker consistency than we will for the rest of the model. If you've got an airbrush, by all means just bang your airbrush base coat on there, but a lot of the skeleton models that I'm going to paint, they have stuff on them other than just bone, so base coating with an airbrush isn't necessarily going to be a viable option. The first highlight is a simple 50-50 mix of the US Olive Drab and the Karak Stone. And I'm going to thin this, as I just said, slightly more than I thinned the base coat paint. So I'll grab a bit more water and add it into that mix there. Still using a nice large brush, we're now going to paint approximately 80% of the area that we painted before. So we're leaving that olive drab colour in the shadows. The reason I really like that olive drab as a base coat is it's sort of got a green tint to it. I suppose the name suggests that. It's sort of a brown green. As I said, whenever I'm painting bone or horn, this is often my go-to paint for basing with. The reason we're using quite a thin mix to do our first highlight with is we're going to apply this mix 2 or 3 times, twice to be honest with you. And because it's very translucent, it's quite easy to get nice blends with it. So when we add the next layer of it, we'll get a slightly stronger colour, and we'll only cover, say, 70% of the area. So a nice, quick, easy way to start developing sort of fairly smooth blends with your painting. Now, I know you might think this is quite an involved process for just doing a generic skeleton dude in the army, and especially if you're going to have a horde of them. But what I wanted to do before I painted my army was test the scheme out. I want to use the same recipe on my characters as I do on my rank and file. The only difference being that I might be a little bit more precise with the actual paintwork itself, but I want to use the same colours. So it's a nice way to find out if this will work. But also, with all of our videos, we look at trying to enjoy the painting as well. It's not just a means to an end. We're always trying to improve our techniques and just enable ourselves to enjoy doing the painting part of a project more than we have. So for instance, on this guy, I'll spend a little bit more time on the face. That's where your eyes are going to get drawn to, and his pointing arm as well. But certainly at this stage, everything's getting the same treatment. So there's that first layer dry. So we go back in with exactly the same mix. As I say, this time focusing perhaps on 70% of the overall area. I've sped this up because, I mean, really, once you see me paint one bone on this guy, you've seen me paint all the bone on this guy. There really is nothing else to him. But I figured if I was going to do a video on painting the bone, we may as well use a model that's got plenty of it on. And like I mentioned before, very important at this stage when we're using this thinner paint that we don't have too much on our brush. These modern GW skeleton sculpts, they're really easy to paint. The detail is so well defined on them. It really is almost just colouring in. I also appreciate that if you're painting a horde of skeletons, then maybe you're just going to spray it an off-white colour and bang a wash of skeleton horde or whatever. Great, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm sure that's got its place. But as I say, we want to try and enjoy that paint process as well. So this mix is a 50-50 of the Karak Stone and this time the deck tam, using exactly the same consistency of the mix. And this time perhaps covering, I don't know, 40% of the area. So each time slightly less. You can see I'm taking a little bit more care with this step around his face and around those focal points. I'll do a few bits on the back of him with this, but at this point I'm probably not going to bother painting the back of him much more. But you see already he's really starting to come together. We've just got 3 paints on there at the moment. And this has taken real time about 10 minutes. The nice thing about using dilute paint and thin layers of it is it dries really quickly. So by the time we've finished the last part, we can go back to the area we worked on first and add a few more layers and just build those highlights up. So it might seem quite an involved process for a generic skeleton, but by the time you've done a unit of this guy, you're going to be a lot more familiar with working with the different consistencies of paint. Your brush skills are going to be stronger. You'll be a better painter for it. And with the book coming out soon, I'm not quite sure how many of these guys I'm going to have to paint, so I may as well get good at it, or certainly get to a point where I'm enjoying doing it and enjoying the result. So here he is once we've applied those highlights. So there's plenty of interest and definition on him already. And this is a nice bone, but as I said earlier, I want mine to be sort of dingier and darker. If you wanted to take it a little brighter, you could just do pure deck tan for a highlight as well. Perhaps that's something I'll do on my character models. But on all of them, I'm going to apply a brown-green wash. To make that up, I'm using a 50-50 mix of Agrax Earthshade and a contrast paint Creed Camo. If you've watched the other videos in this sort of corrosion / how to paint a skeleton series, you'll notice I've been using these Agrax plus a colour wash quite a lot. I'm really enjoying the effects I'm getting from them and how it's changing the colour of the paint underneath. So this is a very difficult application of just slopping that mix all over, basically. I've watered it down ever so slightly in that I've got some water on my brush, and I keep putting my brush back in the water each time I take it off the camera there. Pop it in some water, pop it in that wash mix, go back onto the model. If you do get loads of it pooling in one area, then you can just clean your brush and use that to wick it up. But the properties we get by combining the wash and the contrast paint is something I'm really enjoying using and playing around with at the moment. It stains or filters or tints, whatever you want to call it, the paint underneath, but it doesn't leave us with those nasty tide marks that you tend to get with a normal acrylic wash. So we've now got this nice dirty brown-green sort of tinge to him. So we'll also get a nice sort of satin finish from that mix as well, which helps move us away from that dusty old bone into that sort of more gross, wet, swampy bone we're going for. The last step, I'm going to use an enamel wash. So in my first well, I've put a little bit of mineral spirits. In this case, I used Odorless Thinner's Sansador by Winsor Newton. And I'm going to use a green enamel wash. In this case, Amma by Mig's Slimy Grime Dark, which is a fantastic name. It's exactly what it sounds like. Being a lot more selective now. just adding it into a few areas where I want to make it look like maybe there's a build-up of lichen or something like that on the model. And I'll do it in stages. I'll let this dry, get a hairdryer on it if you want, but do be aware that if you blow on it too forcefully, then you're going to move that wash around and it's not going to stay where you put it. But the hairdryer will evaporate those mineral spirits and dry the enamel onto there. But I'd rather apply it in multiple layers than just slop it all over and take it off. I'm really pleased with how this guy's turning out. Really excited to paint some more of them, which is always a nice place to be in. Here he is finished, and I've also painted the same recipe onto the skeleton warrior that we've been using in the other corrosion videos. You can see the effect that we're going for. I think we've achieved quite well, this old dingy, grimy, swampy old bone. And if you look at the skeleton warrior, one of the reasons that I wanted to go for that wasn't just for the whole sort of overall atmosphere, but if I'd painted a very bright bone colour, quite a dry, bright bone on there, I think the whole model would have been a little bit too overwhelming. The verdigris, all the oxidisation effects that we're doing, they're quite over the top and in your face on this model. So by having the bone that little bit darker, just blends into the background a little bit more, I think for me it's a much more pleasing model to look at. And ultimately, that's all you can ask for from your own paint jobs. I really hope you've enjoyed this series so far. Let me know if you're interested in me covering things like the cloth or something like that on him, and perhaps looking at one of the other troop types from the undead army, maybe one of the zombies. I know I'm going to be painting quite a few of those things in the near future. If you have enjoyed the video, then hit the like button, and if you want to see the other corrosion videos, I'll pop a playlist, so hit subscribe and you can check that out. But thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.